I'm back with another hardware video. Uh, Given that the last ones were about messing around with voice over IP, I decided to go back through my bin of hardware projects that I'd collected starting last summer. Mostly, I guess you could consider it like e-waste, stuff I picked up at Goodwill. This one here is from a little device called Ooma Telo or Telo. They basically sell a little box you can plug a phone into and get a service, and it does voice over IP stuff. As you can see, it has little buttons to do things like playback messages and stuff. So found one in a bin at Goodwill, picked it up, brought it home, cracked it open, and this is actually pretty nice. They do a pretty good job of labeling everything. You can see, like, it'll say, you know, the WAN port, the LAN port, and it even up here said that it was a UART. However, these aren't really through holes, they're little copper pads. I tried soldering, wires to them, but they didn't like staying. It was really difficult. I was able to at least hold some pins onto it, run a serial console and get output seeing, so I was able to test it. But couldn't do much without like an actual soldered in connection. And when I looked around, I did come across some people who had messed with these, and they showed that older versions just had pins on board. So this newer one didn't. So I kind of chucked it aside and forgot about it for a bit. And decided to dig it back out, took a closer look at it, and I started looking at the traces. And I was able to like see that they crossed some through holes, went through the back, and then the through holes came over here to where there was a couple other bigger solder pads. Pulled a multimeter on there. I could see that there was voltage. Popped on an oscilloscope, fired it up, saw that there was data coming across. Looked like typical sort of ASCII characters. So I soldered in some wires, and sure enough, I was able to get a nice steady connection and start messing around. So just for looking on the outside of the thing though, this chip here is from NXP. I had a hard time finding the part number on it until I came across a data sheet saying, oh, these are part numbers for older versions of these chips. You should be looking at the newer ones. So went and looked that up. And it's a little dual core 32-bit ARM processor used in a bunch of sort of IoT kind of stuff. And it has a whole bunch of things on it. So looked like there was a lot of stuff I could mess around on there. And being that a lot of my projects are trying to get 9-front to run on these things, there's plenty of 32-bit 9-front kernels to work with. So as far as other things on here, so the back has, 2 Ethernet ports. One's supposed to connect to the internet and then the other back into your home network. There's a USB power. There's a little button on the back, probably like a reset button. And then there's a jack for a telephone. As far as other chips on here, we got some RAM. We have a NAND flash chip here, I think is about 128 megabytes, so it's a decent amount on there. And then there was an RF shield covering this little thing. It's kind of hard to see. I was able to get a little camera in there and look. And this is a chip made by DSP Group. Called the DCX81. This one has a few other numbers on it, so it must be like a series of chips. But its purpose is to do this thing called DECT, which is for sort of talking to wireless phone handsets. Very kind of fancy one. So, and noticing that, if you look, there's a couple holes here. If you can look real close, a little bit easier on the back here. There's little traces, and these are 2 antennas. So this thing puts out 1.9 gigahertz, has a couple of antennas, and is meant to talk to, other sort of devices that speak that sort of DECT protocol. So, and then on the top, because the thing sits in the case like this, there's this little wheel of LEDs. And then here are some buttons that go through to the little buttons on the lid. Oh, and inside too, there was a little speaker that plugs in. So right there. So lots of information on here. There's a DECT ID, a MAC address. They tell you the Gould version 4.2, part numbers, lots of pretty good information on it, and everything's actually really well labeled. So even up at the top here, it says it's a JTAG at this little pads up here also. So, but anyway, let's go ahead and connect this up and see what we can find. All right, got the terminal up, plugging it in. Hitting enter, and there we go. So I'm now into U-boot on this thing. So actually quite a bit of environmental variables in there. So when it boots up, it does try to first talk to the network, boot something. So that's probably like a, something set up to do firmware upgrades or possibly installs at the factory. See what kind of commands they have on here. Oh, basically a full set. So it looks like it basically gives you everything. Some of these UBI ones at the end here, they came in handy because when I fired it up and let it just boot into Linux, the keyboard just wouldn't work, wouldn't take any input. So these guys here who had some information on it, all the way down at the bottom, it mentioned that in the newer firmwares, they disabled the console in Linux. So to get back to having a prompt there, you'd run this in U-boot, and it would enable it. And so I did that, and I was able to get Serial Console to work all the way through into Linux. So let's go ahead and just restart the thing here and let it get into Linux. So yeah, so there's that boot P broadcast that's doing. That's it actually going out and trying to find something that can boot off the network with. Now it looks like it's checking the flash. This thing takes like a surprisingly long time to boot too. There, it looks like it's loading up a kernel. Yep, found a Linux 3.2.26 for ARM. And now it's actually starting to load up Linux here. Some things coming by here. Standard 8250 serial driver. A lot of this Comcerto stuff. Not quite sure what that is yet. Bring up the Ethernet. Like it's trying to do some Bluetooth stuff. I didn't really notice anything on here having to do with that, but it could be in there. If you just let it boot up all the way, you can get into like a little web interface from the back. This thing is built around a whole subscription model though, so I only played around with it for a bit because it's, without actually having a subscription, it doesn't really do much. So, yep, firing up Drop Bear. There's the light TTPD, the little, oh yeah, it is firing up Bluetooth. I'll have to check that again to see what kind of Bluetooth stuff there is. Let's see, am I at, not at a current, not at a prompt yet. Oh, you know, I think that's the other thing. I'm actually going to have to restart this thing and plug an Ethernet cable in, because that was the other problem I had, is that it wouldn't even finish booting if it couldn't, you know, talk to the mothership, basically. I'll power it off. Plug an Ethernet into the WAN cable. All right, let's try this again. Yeah, 256 megabytes of RAM, it says there. And then, yeah, the, oh, that's a Toshiba 1024 megas. That's a gig of storage on here. Well, that kind of makes sense. I mean, especially if this thing's supposed to be storing like voicemails and stuff, it might actually have a fair amount of storage on it. Let's see if we can get all the way to the prompt this time. I flipped it over and noticed that like the lights, the little ring of LEDs were like sort of pulsing red. Had to remember, oh yeah, this thing won't, yeah. Another thing about this one is that this Linux that's on here has a lot of their stuff put in it. There's a watchdog or something running. After a while, the whole thing will just reset because it can't obviously talk to the computer and hook up to whatever service you're supposed to be subscribing to. But after some amount of time, I think it was like 5 or 10 minutes, it would just reset. But until then, we can poke around and see what's in there. We have some RTL 8192 on the USB interface. That's interesting. That is a wireless chip. But I don't see any other kind of like antennas etched onto the board. I might be missing something though. Alright. Nope, still not giving me a prompt. Still flashing red for some reason. Well, I have gotten it to work before. Give it a second, it might just be mad about something else. Nope, still blinking red. So, I'm not going to get into it this time. Oh wait, nope, it changed from red. Blinking purple. Still not giving me a prompt this time. Yeah, this thing's really fussy. It's really wants to be set up in a particular way. So, but yeah, I'm not too interested in actually playing with the Linux end of it, other than going through and seeing what kind of stuff I could find. So it does seem to say it has some kind of Wi-Fi on it, so that'll be interesting to like dig around and look for. Yeah, just no prompts today. Well, might just have to call this one quits for now and try again some other time. Granted, I'm not interested in really playing with the Linux on it. The whole point is actually eventually get 9 front on there instead. So let's move on to another piece of hardware. Well, next up is this AT&T little hotspot box. So on the back here we have Ethernet. This is supposed to go into your house. 2 phone jacks, power. This one has a nice on-off switch. Antennas, and these ones are supposed to take ones for cell radios, so not Wi-Fi antennas. So I can get this board out. This one lifted up. There we go. So this one's like jam-packed full of stuff. So underneath there's a spot to take a battery, and then the SIM card goes in that little slot there. This thing is actually the made by ZTE. It's the model MF279. So if you go online, you can find quite a few of these things for sale from various, either under their own brand or like AT&T branded. Yeah, they run on 4G. So they're still out there. I don't think AT&T sells them new, but from what I understand, after having them for so long, they were eligible to be unlocked, and so quite a few of them are unlocked and can go anywhere. I have mine, have a T-Mobile SIM card in it, and while they do throttle it, it does work. So the data's throttled quite a bit. But if you plug in a regular, if you plug in like a regular old school handset, you can just make phone calls from it, you know, check your voicemail and stuff. So the board itself has a mini PCI thing for your actual cell radio on board. They're kind of hard to make out here, but there's traces in there, and they're labeled for both 2 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. So there's Wi-Fi. The thing acts as a access point, so you can, you know, put a SIM card in there and then, you know, use your laptop to access the internet through it. So this thing actually runs a MIPS chip, very similar to the one I did a video that is actually on my summer hardware hacking projects one, where it was a MIPS, the 74K series. So another Atheros chip. I was like kind of stoked at first because that was, I thought, oh great, I could just throw something on here. So at first I picked this thing up, kind of poked around at it, and was like, well, that's interesting, but I couldn't figure out right away what chip it was running because it was kind of vague in the prompts, but eventually just pulled the RF shield off and read it off, and it was a different version of the Atheros MIPS chips. So interestingly enough, probably for dealing with different regions and different cell phone frequencies, the cell antennas are in these little plastic things clipped onto the side, and so is the GPS. So this thing also has a GPS antenna because a lot of cell radios do use GPS. So there's one USB header on the bottom, and it actually comes through on the bottom of the thing. I'm not sure, maybe it's just for updating the firmware or something, because it's not, you know, once you have the thing, there's supposed to be a lid that goes onto the bottom of it, so it's not something you'd have general access to. But it is there. So this one was pretty simple. There was 4 pins on the side. Tested them, they were the UART, or 4 through holes, and I soldered the pins in. So let's go ahead and load this one up. Alright, got this little AT&T hotspot plugged in now. Alright. So we're into the U-boot prompt. Let's see what we get. So here's our standard boot arguments. What it will want to do is do this nboot, which is going to boot from NAND. But it does have some options here where it does sort of load up its own IP address and looks for this particular server. You know, and that's a private IP address. And then it has some TFTP options. So I'm guessing this is some buttons held down or something. This will, you know, load in, you know, U-boot, root, kernel. This is probably how the thing's provisioned at the factory, or how it can be updated. But this one also has like basically all the tools. So I'm going to go ahead and reset it and let it boot into Linux so we can see what that does. So let it boot. And away we go. Yeah, it's found Ethernet 0. These chips have 2 Ethernets, but this one only has 1 Ethernet plug on the back, so I'm guessing it's only going to load 1. But they do have the ability to run 2 and a simple Ethernet switch on top of it. So still booting here. Somewhere in here is going to be all the stuff for the Wi-Fi on it too. Yeah, there we go, Wi-Fi 1. Yeah, it's doing some more Wi-Fi stuff, or this could even be, hard to say if it's the Wi-Fi or the cell radio. It says Wi-Fi 1. I'm guessing it's going to be chatting about the Wi-Fi. Yeah, here we got a prompt now. So we get a nice cool logo. What are we running? Running Linux 3.3.8, compiled back in 2018. So here's our devices. It shows Ether, or the Atheros. This is going to be the Wi-Fi for both 2 and 5 gigahertz. We got a bridge device. We got our Ethernet 0. And then we have a USB Ethernet, and it has an IP address. So this thing doesn't have a Ethernet plugged into it right now. This is just strictly going over cell radio. And it can ping Google, so it can see the rest of the world. So yeah, the whole thing functions. Lucky for me, I got it for just a couple bucks at Goodwill. As you can see from that the thing here, you know, people will pay a couple $100s for it, it seems like. Well, some of them are pretty cheap, I guess. You get it straight from AliExpress. But I'm going to go ahead and reboot this thing again and try to fire up a 9-front kernel. Already got a command here. This is going to set an IP to 1 for my network. This is the IP for my file server. This will be where to load a plan9.ini, where to pull down and load a kernel that should work, and then tell it to go ahead and go. Oops. Forgot I gotta actually plug in the Ethernet this time. It can't reach my server via cell phone. All right. Oops. Come on. All right. Reset the machine and try it again. There it goes. So for some reason, it gets as far as, you know, it's actually talking to the chip, fires it up, starts provisioning the Ethernet, gets out of kernel mode into user space, and this whole argument here is trying to run PackFS. PackFS is there's a small file system compiled with the kernel that has, you can add some utilities to it. And these will be things like running the shell script, because after this step, it actually starts running just a shell script to continue doing the boot process. But for some reason, it's freezing up right here. When I dug into it, it seems to be stopping at a function called read 9p message, which is just doing reads. So I'm not really sure why. So almost there. And then getting the rest of it really shouldn't be too hard. Again, I already have the Ethernet working. I've done it on a couple of these other Atheros boards. So the Ethernet's already done. After that, it's going to be setting up the PCI bus, talking to a USB device, which again, there's already stuff in Plan 9 to do that. And then there's also stuff to handle USB Ethernet devices. Like the Pi 3 is, the Ethernet on that is technically a USB Ethernet device plugged into the Pi's USB bus, and that's how it works. That's why you'll hear a lot of people complain about quite a bit of the Pis. Matter of fact, it isn't really until the Pi 5 that they kind of got something set up like a proper computer, but now it costs so much, you might as well just buy a proper computer. But anyway, so fun little hardware projects, how to break into them. And as always, have fun.